So, hi everyone, and welcome to our Inspiring Thursday series dedicated to bringing the stories of inspiring individuals in reshaping the fashion industry. So, I'm Foni from Vestas Labs, and today we are honored to have with us Olivia Pinnock, sorry, Olivia. um, so, Olivia is a fashion journalist and a sustainable fashion advocate, and also a lecturer at London College of Fashion. So, I'm very excited to have you here. And with your rich background in storytelling, sustainable fashion, and also lecturing and deep commitment to sustainability, um, I'm very excited to have you, who is a driving force in promoting innovative and ethical practices. So, without further ado, let's dive in. So, Olivia, thank you so much for coming up with such an interesting topic today about storytelling and how storytelling can promote sustainability and how unlocking our imaginations can lead to a more sustainable future in fashion. So how do you see this? I mean, how do you see the storytelling as a tool for promoting sustainability within the fashion industry?
Thank you so much for having me today, Bonnie. To get into this topic. It's one that's very close to my heart. So I think with storytelling, there are sort of two main ways that it plays a really crucial role in getting to the sustainable future that we want. And the first is raising awareness. It's kind of the obvious thing, like by telling stories, we unlock people's awareness of the issues that are happening. And again, the best stories, human beings love stories, right? That's why we're
Yes.
constantly reading books and watching films and watching TV and telling stories, and whether they're real
Yeah.
stories of things that are happening in our lives or imagined stories. Um, and that's the way that we as humans connect, right? So we want people to connect with these issues that can sometimes feel a bit abstract, can feel a bit heavy. Um, we can put a human face on them. So I think raising awareness is really important for that. Um, I think a really good example of this is the True Cost documentary, which I'm sure
Yes.
many of your listeners have seen. And if you haven't, it's really a must watch. I mean, it was 2015 now that it came out, but I think that stands out as an example of a documentary that almost everyone I know working in sustainability has seen, continues to engage with people,
Indeed.
and really powerful piece of storytelling that again put a human face on these issues and really raised a lot of awareness, changed a lot of things for a lot of people. Is a lot of motivation. It obviously came out 2 years after the Rana Plaza disaster as
Yes.
well. So I think, and those really stand as kind of turning points in sustainability. I think it's not that people weren't talking about it before or doing work in the space, or that the issues weren't necessarily unknown, but as a turning point for becoming more mainstream and gathering more momentum. So again, it's really interesting that a particular incident, a news story, and a documentary that follows that have been really key to where we've got to today. And there are so many other brilliant documentaries out there
Yeah.
that exist. I love Fashion Reimagined from Amy Powney at Mother of Pearl is a recent example that's really moving. Slay is a really interesting documentary about animals in the conversation around sustainability. Um, River Blue is a really interesting one about water related issues with the fashion industry. So there are many other great documentaries out there that are really good examples of storytelling for raising awareness. I would love to see more fiction examples in the
Mm.
future, because I think they can also be really powerful. Um, there is only kind of one example I can think of. I would love to hear if there are any other examples people know of, but there was a film that came out in 2020 called Greed. I don't know if you saw it.
Rings a bell, but I haven't seen it. Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, it wasn't great.
Okay. But it's powerful.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. It's a Michael Winterbottom film, and and he
Okay.
always incorporates some kind of like social issue
Right.
in his work very very often. And it stars Steve Coogan, and it follows. It's a not
Mm.
so subtle basic portrayal of like Philip Green from Topshop.
Right.
Um,
Okay.
maybe I shouldn't say that because obviously for legal reasons they couldn't do that. But it's kind of like a high street tycoon, and
Got
um,
it.
it's a kind of like mad power drunk story. It gets a little bit ridiculous towards the end, which is where I think it kind of fell flat. And again, it didn't have a huge marketing budget, and I don't think it's really been widely seen. So that's maybe not a great example, but I do think it is interesting to see this topic being taken on. I think if you think of something like a film like Blood Diamond and what it did for the diamond
Yes,
industry, um,
absolutely.
that's I think that is really interesting. I mean, I've done some work covering the diamond industry, and that film still really, like, people still really hold on to that film and believe that there's been a lot of change that's happened since then. I'm not saying the diamond industry is perfect, it absolutely isn't.
Yes.
um, but because of that and the public awareness that that created,
Mm.
a lot of change has happened. So wouldn't it be interesting if instead of The Devil Wears Prada, like, it started out as a fashion intern at a magazine and then suddenly goes down this thriller twist of them uncovering corruption in fashion brands or something. Wouldn't that be, something that could go mainstream and be gripping and attention grabbing?
Yeah, absolutely. You should start a script and send it out.
I am very, very
And
much a
people
journalist and not a
remember.
creative writer. So this is me expressing my wishes for what I want to see in the world. Hopefully, something else can
No, no,
resonate,
seriously. I
be
think I
inspired.
think that would be very, very compelling because as you said, true story was such an inspiration for many people. For me and for so many people that I spoke with over the past few years, it is actually, very impactful. So yeah, I'm waiting for that script, Olivia.
But I think also storytelling. I think we are at a stage of awareness.
Yes.
There's been a lot of work done in that space, and I think there is another role that storytelling can play in creating a new narrative for fashion,
Mm.
as well. And that's maybe where we need to move to next, because also, again, these kind of the awareness raising tends to be quite negative.
Yeah.
We're living in a very, very negative news cycle at the moment. It's difficult for people to engage with
Yeah.
that and with so many issues.
That's true. Yeah.
Um, and so how can we also spin out positive stories, and how can we Rachel Arthur, who wrote the UN Environment Programme's Sustainability Fashion Communication Playbook, which came out last year. And if people listening are interested in this topic, I highly recommend you go read that, because it lays out sort of principles for how to communicate, in a sort of, what we need to do to communicate to build a sustainable fashion system. And it's a really, really great resource. And she calls us architects of desire. The fashion industry are storytellers, you know,
Absolutely. From the very, very beginning,
exactly.
whichever story it was. Yeah.
If we can make people spend £10,000 on a handbag, if we can make Crocs fashionable,
Yes.
then we can make sustainability cool and
Cool.
desirable.
Absolutely. I don't see why not, like, and this is something which is very interesting, actually, it's actually in the questions that are following up. It's like, I mean, why not? Why can't sustainability be cool? What are the challenges, right? I mean, what is stopping people? So it's a whole lot of conversation, of course. It's which is very interesting. And I remember talking to you a lot about this when we met in London. Such interesting conversations we have. So yeah, awesome. So what like when we talk about this, unlocking storytelling, there's so many ideas going around, inspired by so many different kind of like stories. And I do agree with you that that positive, good, feel good feeling is needed at the moment, right? With whatever it is that is going on. And when we talk about this storytelling and unlocking our imaginations for a sustainable future, especially in fashion, what are some of the most exciting and innovative ideas that you've come across?
I think I love, since I started reporting on
Mm,
sustainability, what it's changed for me in terms of what I'm reporting on. I just meet the most inspiring, interesting people.
yes,
Um, and that's something that I want to focus more on going forward. Again, thinking about this positivity. If I individually feel so inspired and moved and part of a really interesting community of people, how can I make that land with the average person, um, as well? So now I get to, before it was a lot of, you would always be kind of interviewing the same people, like reporting, fashion journalism is full of a lot of cliches. It's full of a lot of the same types of articles that you produce year
yeah,
after year. It's, you are stuck in the trend cycle. And
yes,
that gets really dull. as
yes. It's like the same messaging over and over again.
Exactly. There's only so many ways. I used to do copywriting work for brands, like writing product descriptions for their
Yes.
e-commerce sites. And oh my goodness, there are only so many adjectives and different ways that you can describe pairs of jeans. And it used to be, yeah, so dull. But now that I report on sustainability, I do still interview designers and fashion stylists and people like that, but I also interview scientists and technology pioneers and academics
Yes.
and there's just broader cross section of people who we really need to bring into the fold in fashion.
Yes.
Um, and that to me again is just much more exciting and more interesting. And some of the exciting ideas I I've seen. I think materials innovation is an area where there is just some really cool stuff happening.
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
the possibility to lab grow leather, um, or to grow dyes. And I've interviewed someone who grew crystals out of sweat.
Wow.
Her name's Alice Potts. Go look her up. She's very cool.
Oh my God, that's awesome. Okay. Yes.
And some of those ideas, um, they're not to scale yet. They're not, many of them are not even on the market yet. So it can feel a bit like, oh, we really need these innovations now, and they're not quite here. Um, but they will be one day, and they're worth our attention and seeing what's possible as well. I remember quite early on in sort of my work with sustainability, I got invited to speak at a tech conference about this topic of sustainable fashion, which was really interesting. And I'm so used to being in a room full of people who work in fashion. Um, and so I was a bit nervous about it. But what was really amazing and interesting to me was that after the talk, we did a panel discussion, and afterwards people came up to me and they were like, that's so interesting. I had no idea that, fashion was so polluted. I mean, this was like 2016 or 17 or something like that. I had no idea, like, fashion was so bad. And they're like, have you thought about this? And are you trying that? And are you, and I just realized that I was in a room full of problem solvers. And, I'm so used to being in a room full of fashion people where there's a lot of, but what about? When you say to people, we need to stop overconsumption, we need to, give fair wages for garment workers, these really kind of quite simple truths.
Yes.
there's a lot of, oh, but it's difficult. Oh, but consumers don't want it. Oh, but it
Yes.
costs more. Oh, but I can't do that. I can't change this. And just being in a room full of people who, you know, again, technology exists to solve our problems. Not that technology isn't creating some problems as well. It's
Yeah.
a different conversation for a different time.
Yes.
But just inherently as people and their attitude to things was, here is a problem, how can I solve it? And that was quite inspiring to
Yes.
me.
Have you seen some changes within the fashion community though? You know, because you were in this conference like many years ago, right? So, what's kind of your take on the fashion community now?
I think there is an acceptance that things need to change.
Okay, so it has moved a little forward then.
It has, but it hasn't enough.
Yes.
There's still a lot of sticking points. There's still just a lack of progress, which is really disheartening.
Yeah.
I see a lot of fatigue amongst people who work in the sustainability space. Just a lot of frustration.
Yeah. And especially among the emerging brands as well, right? Like it seems that, the feeling is like one step forward, two steps back type of thing, which is also can be very demoralizing for a lot of people who want to push sustainability forward. So yeah.
Definitely. I think, I just came back from the Global Fashion Summit in
Yes.
Copenhagen, and
Yes. How was that?
um, it was good, but also again, I think the really resounding, I mean, again, I've been like looking at a lot of the press coverage following the summit as well, and everyone's kind of picked out the same talk as being the message of the conference, which was the start of the second day, where Vanessa Friedman, fashion editor at the New York Times, hosted a panel, because Vanessa Friedman had been at the very first Global Fashion Summit. It wasn't called Global Fashion Summit then, but what became. And that was 50, so they were celebrating their 15th anniversary of the summit. And Vanessa Friedman had been at the very first one, and she was on a panel with Eva Cruz, who founded it, a couple of other people who had been at the very first one. And there was just a lot of, why are we still sitting here having the same conversations? I mean, Eva Cruz said, she was like, when we talked about circularity, we didn't mean like talking in circles.
Yeah, although it does feel like it probably for her as well.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but I do think out of that anger, out of we've gone from this kind of awareness raising stage,
Mm,
which seems to be there now. And and that there is sort of slow progress. And there's a lot of, disheartened feeling, but I also feel that kind of bubbling up into like an anger, which if we can channel that in the right way is going to be a really
yeah,
powerful force
yeah,
for change. And I think the realities of the climate crisis are becoming more and more acute. The news isn't looking good from the scientists and what we're seeing, and also the news cycle. I think it's becoming really more prevalent in our daily lives.
yeah.
Whether you personally have experienced kind of disruption from a climate related incident, but you surely know someone who has. I've got a friend who's been talking about the floods in Brazil because she's from Brazil. My partner is Italian. Just last spring, there was terrible flooding in the area where his family live.
Yeah.
It was really upsetting. At Global Fashion Summit, I was, the people I was working with, there was someone from New Delhi, and looking at, the heat waves that are happening there right now, it's affecting the people we know and love now.
Yeah.
And from a business perspective, I mean, I do still sometimes get the question of what is the business case for doing this?
Mm,
And
Yeah.
Again, I've gone from really politely gritting my teeth and sort of trying to speak their language to being like, business case is that the world is on fire and that's really bad for business.
I know.
You know, like if we're talking about, you know, extreme heat
Extreme
temperatures and also the
conditions. Yeah.
social fallout, like the political upheaval that comes with that, the economic upheaval that comes with that, the
Yeah.
migration of people, climate refugees, all of these things are only going to become more and more acute.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a heart to care about those things, then know that they're going to affect your bottom line at business as well.
No, absolutely. I mean, and I think the consumers are also plays very, important role in making this change, right? So, um, it is still kind of like a tough call also for consumers, because if they own demand sustainability as the top priority, then businesses will need to change, because that's the demand. But of course, then there is other conversations about who's gonna pay for,
Yeah,
you know,
I think I've also seen a change in that, you know, for a while. Again, I feel like the conversation has gone from initially really being focused at brands and retailers and all those things to kind of then bringing in the consumer
yeah,
into that. And there is absolutely a role for consumers to play,
yeah.
but it's not necessarily their fault that we ended up in this situation in the
No, of
first
course
place.
not. No.
Um,
Yeah.
and so I've seen a shift away from, you know, people feel disempowered for many reasons
Mm.
across a number of issues individually. So turning that blame on consumers doesn't really help solve the issue.
No.
So there's a kind of realization that we have to take responsibility as an industry rather than blaming consumers. But also I'm hearing a lot of brands talking about consumers aren't going to do anything. Like we don't really trust in consumers to actually,
To actually push
change
for
their
it.
behaviors unless
Yeah.
we help them change their behaviors.
Yeah, of course, like exactly. I think it's a collaborative, it needs to be a collaborative initiative, right? It needs to be, like brands have some responsibilities, and initiatives, the consumers, suppliers, everybody needs to kind of play a role in this change. Um,
Absolutely, yeah.
Not
It's a
just,
whole shift that's needed. You know, it's not just like tweaking the buttons a little bit.
exactly.
We can't just, replace cotton with organic cotton and then everything will be fine. We'll still have all of the same problems.
Yeah, I know, absolutely. I mean, there are so many facets to achieve, sustainability in this complex supply chain. It's, but like things need to change one step at a time. Well, so it is a very complex issue. So I'm just curious. I mean, I'm kind of like kind of digressing here from the topic a little bit, because you are lecturing at London College of Fashion, and you are communicating with the new generation as well. And how is the sentiment among the younger generations today towards fashion and sustainability?
Um, it's interesting. It's also changed in the time that
Mm.
I've been lecturing. So again, it kind of started out coming into a classroom and being like, by the way, did you know that this industry you wanted to work in is really exploitative and really polluting? um, and then after a while, I didn't really, they kind of came in already knowing that.
It's like given. It's like basic, like they know it, right? Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And it gathered a lot of momentum, and young people were really, much more informed about these things, and engaged with the issue. I do see that fatigue setting in with them as well.
Okay.
And
That's interesting.
it now seems more, I think it's gone from being more, almost an entire classroom really engaged on the issue and wanting to learn more, to now, maybe 10% of a class that I teach are really interested in sustainability and they incorporate it into their work, and that and the other, like, I mean, everyone young people, like, they want this, they want a sustainable future. They don't want brands to be behaving the way that they do. Um, but I'm not sure they necessarily feel like the ones to change it. Or they're just, again, I think they're just a bit overwhelmed with, like, again, what we were saying, this sort of awareness raising, which is really important. But now they're like, yeah, we know.
Okay.
What next?
That's interesting. Okay, yeah. So, like, so they're aware. It's just that what is the next step? And that's actually on the industry to start kind of,
Yeah, and I
imposing
think
these
there's a
changes,
lot of
right?
yeah, I think there's a lot of focus on young people and environmental issues,
Mm.
not just in fashion but across the board. And again, yes, it's true. I mean, this is based on real research from what Gen Z think, but I think there's an overemphasis on it because I do think
But
older people care as well.
yes.
And I think it the way it's framed often sort of sends the message of, like, oh, but it's okay because Gen Z will save us. And I don't think that's helpful either, because I think we all, like you said, we all need to take responsibility for this. We
Yeah.
all need to be playing it. And also, like, we're the ones that created the mess for this generation. So rather than being like, oh, it's okay, Gen Z will come in and
Well,
they'll
and
forego all of the luxuries and niceties that we had. And then we will be in a sustainable future because that's what Gen Z want. That's not really like what's going to happen, and that's not fair on young people. It's not fair to place that pressure on them.
absolutely agree. I mean, I'm glad you say that actually. Like sometimes with what we're reading, what we are being fed, we always think of it. This is what the Gen Z wants. This is what the Gen Z wants, like, and we don't really talk about the generations before the Gen Z about sustainability. Like you're
Yeah,
right, but the majority of the focus lies on that generation. Yeah.
it does, and I think that's partly because, especially in the fashion industry is always obsessed with younger people because they are the people that buy into trends and change trends and create trends.
True.
The fashion industry lives on trends. So, this obsession with youth in fashion is also partly to blame for that.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but also, I think because of, as they are the primary users of social media, they're much more vocal about these things. So it's much easier to, monitor their conversation and their sentiment around issues.
Mhm.
Um, rather than other generations. So, and I know a lot of, again, kind of independent brands, when if they start out with a sustainability focus, because of this whole narrative that, like, Gen Z are, like, really, really interested in this. They think that Gen Z are their audience. So they create a fashion brand and they're like, well, because I focus on sustainability, Gen Z are my target audience. And, they're mostly selling online as kind of direct to consumer brands. So they're like, yeah, it must be Gen Z. It must be Gen Z. And then they'll do like a pop-up shop and they come and see who's actually coming in and buying the clothes. And they're like, oh, it's not Gen Z. Partly because Gen Z don't have the money.
Exactly.
But like, Gen Z might be their social media audience. They might be like liking their posts and commenting on them, and or being the influencers who share their stuff. But actually, when you have a physical store, they're like, so often it's people who just kind of like, often sort of people aged between 30 and 50, and they're just looking to shop. They're not necessarily engaging with the sustainability aspect of it straight away. They just see a nice product. But then when you start to tell them the story of, oh, and it's kind of sustainable because this is what we do, that's the thing that makes them go, oh, that's great, I want to support that, and they pay for it. There was just some research out this week that millennials are the people spending the most on
Mhm.
sustainable fashion at the moment. And I survey's like a little bit old now. This is like from 2022, I think, but like
Mhm.
Drapers did a sustainability in the consumer report. So it was UK consumers across multiple demographics, about 2,000 consumers, and 70% of them said that they think about sustainability some, if not all of the time when purchasing fashion.
Wow.
And even though that was slightly, it was more likely to be the case in younger consumers who responded to the survey, but it was across age demographics. And if you think of that, like 70% of consumers are thinking about sustainability, that just goes to show you that, again, maybe those people aren't coming into your store and asking questions about sustainability. Maybe they're not liking your stuff on Instagram or your messages about sustainability or all of those kind of things, but they are thinking about it.
And that goes back to the the importance of storytelling, so that it really like consumers thinking about it really to communicate these values to them. So it's all intertwined, so to speak, right?
It is all intertwined, yes.
Yes. Okay, well, thank you so much for that. So okay, this is going to be the last question, I promise. What is your vision then for the future of fashion in terms of sustainability, and how do you think the industry can balance creativity and sustainability effectively?
I think, yeah, it's interesting when you say sort of balancing creativity and sustainability, again, because sustainability needs creative solutions. I think it is more creative to be sustainable. It involves this, again, dreaming and imagining and providing solutions to things, which, and again, I don't believe in gatekeeping ideas of creativity, that like some people are creative and some people are not. Human beings are innately creative.
Yep.
And so, the scientists that you work with to come up with, and the farmers that you work with to come up with sustainable solutions, they're also creative. So I think, and again, if you think about what fast fashion has done, it has eliminated a lot of creativity. It's created a lot of brands creating a lot of the same thing.
Yes.
It's led to a lot of burnout in creative people because you can't churn out that much stuff. And so and again, it kind of favors mass production over craft things. So actually, I think we need to regain more creativity in order to address sustainability. But I think my future vision for fashion, I think, is one of a fashion industry that means much more. It has a broader scope. And by that, I mean engaging with fashion in ways that is not just consumption. I think that's also, again, ways that we can be creative and rethink how do we enjoy all the benefits that fashion gives us. Fashion is fun. Why did you get into the fashion space, Bonnie? What about fashion appeals to you?
Oh, I've always been quite creative, so to speak. So, and I've always been fascinated by the fashion industry just because it is like, it's an industry with creative people, business people. It is, it has so much, it is very close to culture, to movies, films, music, like there's so many facets of the fashion industry, which is super fascinating. And that's the reason why, I've always been fascinated by it since I was a kid, following, fashion show designers and everything else. And that's also the reason why, after being in finance, I was like, you know what? No, I want to be in this industry. And this was before I was aware about, of course, like the environmental cost of fashion, so to speak. So after being in the industry for many years, and Trucos, of course, is one of also one of an inspiration that triggers this thinking. But just being in the middle of it and to see all the waste and the inefficiencies, it really kind of woke me up.
Yeah, it ruins the dream, right?
Yes, in a way, because before it was this kind of like glamorous, really, you know, like this, like you say, it's like this dreamy, you know, imaginations. And then, you know, you see the real thing behind it, and it's not so glamorous after
Yeah,
all.
exactly. And it's the same for me, you know, and I'm always it has ruined a lot of my awareness around sustainability. It's ruined a lot of my love and joy for fashion, which was the reason I got into it in the first place. And so I'm always thinking about how do we retain those things, you know, the self-expression, the links to
Yeah.
culture, you know, the dreaming and the imagining. You know, when I was a teenager flipping through fashion magazines, I was just like, what is this world and how do I be a part of it?
Exactly, you know, like all those Vogue spreads, which was like fantastic, and I loved it so much, you know. You know, the way they present and express through fashion is just, you know, like amazing. And, you know, we don't want to lose that, right?
No, absolutely. And I think, you know, and I think that's also why it's really sad to see. I mean, of course, I have a vested interest as a person in the media, you know, the kind of decline of fashion magazines, because I think that is a more sustainable way to engage with fashion. You know, just by reading a fashion magazine as an
Yeah,
activity.
yeah.
It helps when you can't afford the clothes in the fashion magazine. But, you know, and I know fashion magazines always, you know, they do also obviously promote this message of consumption and
Yeah,
the
yeah.
thing. But if
But
we can reimagine the way that fashion magazines are
exactly,
done,
exactly, because it's a
um,
storytelling again,
it
you
is,
know.
it's the
It's just
storytelling.
what story that you want to tell.
Exactly. And you know, it's really interesting to see a lot of, you know, fashion films, fashion biopics coming out, a lot more exhibitions related to fashion. You know,
Yes.
these kind of things, I think that should be more the norm rather than this just kind of, in order to like fashion, enjoy fashion, you have to consume, 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 consume.
Yeah. No,
Um,
exactly. That's yeah, you know, the alternative ways to consume fashion. That's a different topic that I think is going to be really interesting to talk about. And where do you see technology fits into all this?
I think, well, as I mentioned previously,
Yeah.
technologists are the solutions, and you know, far bigger dreamers than we often are as, you know, brands or people creating clothing. You know, why do we produce so much clothing and yet it doesn't get better? Like,
Yeah.
doesn't why aren't there really innovative solutions coming out to, you know, like we all have problems with fashion and clothing, right? You know, I can't wear this style because, you know, blah, 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 or I bought this thing and it broke really quickly, or, you know, like
Yeah.
other industries, like if you think about the technology industry, um, there's always an improvement, there's upgrade, there's version 2.0. Right now, clothing just seems to be getting worse and worse. But I think it's also really easy to laugh at technology a bit. And I think sometimes we do that in fashion. I was just thinking about, you know, digital fashion, which was such a big story, you know,
Mm.
a few years ago, and particularly during the pandemic, like talking about, you know, would you pay for an item of clothing that isn't real?
Yeah.
Um, and and a lot of the narrative around it was kind of, this is like this crazy idea, it's the ultimate vanity in a way. I mean, a lot of people were claiming, you know, well, actually it's more sustainable because you're not, you know, using resources to the same extent as you are with physical clothing.
Yeah.
um, and you know, and it would be easy to go like, well, it hasn't really taken off in the way people were saying it might, but actually it has, just more behind the scenes. Like there are big fashion brands using 3D clothing design and creating digital samples. And I think
Exactly.
that's where we're going to see it. And so like we might initially kind of like laugh at ideas that technology presents to us, but if we apply them in the right way, I mean, technology is only as good as the way you apply it, right? You know, the
Exactly.
technologists come up
Applying
with
it.
these ideas, and then we
Yes.
figure out how to use it in the best way.
Yeah, exactly. And that's you hit the, you know, the right point there. You need to use it in the right way to be, you know, to reap the full benefits of technology.
And I think with,
So
you know, with Vestis Lab as well, you know, what you're doing with kind of you're creating stories about
yes,
about clothing.
about
Like
the
you
clothing,
are
yes,
enabling the storytellers, and if we have
yes,
those stories as part of our clothing, then the story becomes so much more interesting. It's so much more than just this was a cute top and it didn't cost me a lot of money.
absolutely.
It tells you the story behind it, and that's really powerful.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you so much for that. I mean, we are, I think, running a bit out of time. So I just want to conclude this with a big, big thank you for sharing your insights and experience with us. So, your work in this field and, all the imaginative storytellings and solutions are truly inspiring. So it's been such a pleasure talking to you. And, let's continue talking because there's so many different topics, right, that we need to cover.
Absolutely. Yeah. I loved our discussion. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So before we wrap up, is there any final message that you'd like to share with our viewers or listeners who are passionate about the fashion industry?
Oh, just keep believing yourself and what you're doing. Believe in a better vision. Unlock your imagination when you hit stumbling blocks. Just that's when we need storytelling and imagination more than ever. So keep going. We need you.
Oh, great. Thank you so much for your time. And I'll see you. We'll speak again soon.
Absolutely. Yes, I will see you soon.